Hello, and welcome back to the Europa Games. Since part 1, my subscriber count has tripled, special thanks to my Eurovision 1996 video becoming an unexpected hit. Chances are, many of my new subs haven't seen part 1 yet, so it's linked in the description. Also linked in the description is Tales of the Hunger Games by Christian Blanco, which this series is heavily inspired by. Content warning for descriptions of violence, and the fourth games has an additional warning for references to SA, though it won't be described in detail. The fourth Europa Games lasted 4 days and were won by Nensi Franjic, age 17, from Croatia. Norway was swapped out for Iceland, restarting the 3-year cycle of associate members. Nensi was the second eldest in a litter of 4, being raised by a loving but strict single mother. When she was reaped, she, her mom, and her 2 younger siblings all hugged and cried enough tears to fill the Dead Sea. Croatia had finished 12th the previous year, and since 3 Big Four countries finished above them, they were automatically qualified to the grand final. As had become customary, the 14 automatically qualified tributes sat in the rec room of the training centre as the 10 qualifiers were revealed one by one. The Slovenian tribute, Ines, was the 7th tribute to enter, and Nensi immediately got up and pulled her into a hug, saying she knew they were going to work well together. The 9th qualifier to be revealed was Graham, from Scotland, who opened the door and exclaimed, "The Celtic Alliance is complete at last," in reference to this being the first time that Scotland had qualified to the grand final of the Europa Games. The Irish tribute, Sarah, laughed and said he didn't make decisions about her allies, but she'd think about it. Nensi was assigned to share with Sofia, from Cyprus. Nensi asked Sofia which the qualifiers already had a kill count, and Sofia said all she could remember was that the Romanian tribute killed 2 other competitors, before herself getting killed by Attila, from Hungary. In the morning, Nensi and Ines had breakfast together. While they were eating, they were approached by Anton, from Slovakia, who said he was told to come fetch them. Nensi and Ines were confused, but went along with him anyway. He brought them out of the breakfast room and to the landing upstairs, where 3 other boys were already gathered. The oldest and tallest one introduced himself as Vitek, from Poland. He said he had gathered all 6 of the Slavic tributes because they needed to stick together. He pointed out that no Slavic tribute had made the final 5 yet, and they couldn't let the Northern Alliance keep dominating the game. The others agreed, and an alliance was formed. During the first day of training, Graham asked Sarah if she thought about having a Celtic alliance, to which Sarah replied that she had been joking in the rec room the day before and was of course up for it. Graham said they should try and expand the alliance, and pointed out that the Maltese tribute was always a lone wolf in the arena, and they all had the displeasure of being ruled by the same country. Kiastis and Albin were happy to be reunited in real life once again, and they both helped to train the new Northern Alliance. Inga, from Lithuania, asked Kiastis about his new life in Brussels, and Kiastis went on about the trams, the buzzing nightlife, and how he and his boyfriend could hold hands in public without getting yelled at. They noticed Lazaros 2 stations down, half-heartedly showing the Greek and Cypriot tributes how to throw knives, and clearly exhausted from the number of questions they kept asking. Kiastis and Albin agreed to make it their mission to cheer Lazaros up before the end of the games. After 3 days of training, it was time for the interviews. Nensi was the second to go on, and wore a pale green dress with her hair done in waves. Graham Norton talked to her about her family, and she described how they wanted to murder each other at times, but they were all very close. Graham noted her eldest brother wasn't present at the reaping, and Nensi explained that he moved to a different town for work, and she wished she could have said goodbye to him. Graham asked Nensi what she would say if she could see her brother right now, and suddenly a large screen descended onto the stage. The audience gasped as Nensi's brother appeared, sitting in his living room. He spoke to his sister one more time, telling her to make it out alive, and their family wouldn't be complete without her. Nensi noted this was the first time she had ever seen him cry. The Hungarian tribute, Attila, won the audience over by talking about the volunteer work he did with the blind. Graham mentioned how he killed the Romanian tribute, making it the 2nd time in a row that Romania finished 11th in the semis. Attila insisted that he did so in self-defense, and the camera footage would back him up. The Dutch tribute, Hubert, got a laugh out of the audience when he answered no to every single one of Graham's questions, even if it wasn't an applicable answer. The Polish tribute, Vitek, made waves by showing up on stage in an Adidas tracksuit, insisting that a battle to the death wouldn't make him compromise his heritage. When his kills of the Finnish and Icelandic tributes in the semi-final were brought up, he winked at the camera and said, "That was just a warm-up." The next day, the tributes were bussed to the arena and taken to individual rooms, where they were given a t-shirt, a waterproof jacket and trousers, and mountaineering boots. After everyone was ready, they were blindfolded and led to their pedestals. The bloodbath was nothing short of a disaster for the Northern Alliance. As they tried to get into back-to-back formation, the Slavic Alliance came at them from all angles. Vitek achieved the first kill of the grand final after shooting an arrow in the head of Monique from Denmark and exclaiming, "Danish? More like vanish." Pretty soon, most of the remaining tributes had fled the heart, leaving the Slavic Alliance control over the bulk of the supplies. All members of the Alliance had survived the bloodbath, with the exception of the Czech tribute. The heart of the arena this year was a small island in the middle of a river, split into two, surrounded by 3 large cliffs. The current of the river was quite strong, and 2 tributes drowned on their way out. The only member of the Northern Alliance to survive the bloodbath was Fritzis from Latvia, but within the first hour of the game, he got caught in a trap set by Rosalina from Spain. Rosalina was trying to win sponsors by being creative with deaths of other tributes, and used Fritzis to reenact Samson and Delilah. While he struggled to get out of the ropes, she ripped out his hair with her bare hands, then gouged out his eyes. For the sponsor packages, it was decided that the 7 countries that did not get to send in a package last year would go first, then the remaining 22 would go in a random order. The first sponsor package was awarded by France to Rosalina, and she received 2 croissants and a flask of fresh water. She said to herself, "That was easy," and continued to trek through the hills for her next victim. After the first 3 hours, no more deaths occurred on the first day, as most of the tributes set up camp on the cliffs, and it was difficult for them to spot each other. In addition to having a 24-hour live feed, every evening a 90-minute Europa Games slot aired on primetime TV. Each episode began with a recap from Graham Norton, followed by footage showing the main events of the day, accompanied by commentary from each broadcaster in their state's official language. It was followed by Europa Games Extra. This companion show originally debuted during the 3rd Games, when it was hosted by Daniel Engfeldt. But after 1 season, he was sacked in favour of previous winners Kjastas Astrauskas and Albin Lindqvist. In each episode, they would discuss highlights, play games, and chat to a celebrity panel. One new segment this year was Cheer Up Lazarus, where the 2 hosts would drag Lazarus on camera and do things to try and make him smile. In the first episode, they sat on either side of him and told terrible dad jokes. It didn't work. Because of this segment, a campaign started online for viewers from eliminated countries to send their sponsor gifts to the Cypriot tribute, in hope that Cyprus would win again and that would cheer Lazarus up. As night fell, the Slavic Alliance settled beneath some trees that were situated further down the river. Vitek said he was proud of them on their first day, and offered to take the first night shift. Once he was sure everyone was asleep, he got up and ventured away from the rest of the Alliance. He started following the sound of someone imitating an American crow, and it was revealed to be Attila from Hungary. As he approached him, Vitek chuckled and asked which wing was broken. Attila sighed and asked what he had. Vitek reached into his pocket and handed him some dried meat that was in one of their backpacks. Vitek and Attila formed a side alliance during training, but Vitek kept it secret from the other Slavs, not knowing how they'd react to having a non-Slav in their ranks. Vitek told Attila it was his turn to return the favour, and Attila sighed and let Vitek make out with him for 15 seconds. Vitek said, "Pleasure doing business with you," and went back to his alliance's camp. The sun rose in the sky as the Celtic Alliance lay in one of the higher areas of the arena. They had renamed themselves the Brexit Alliance following the admittance of Lauren from Malta. Graham was the last to take a watch shift, and shortly into his run, he got up and took a walk to the other side of the arena. A staff member carrying a camera asked him where he was going, and he said he was off to do a solo mission while the other tributes were ripe for picking. He took a trident with him, which was the only weapon his alliance had between them. He ventured down the cliff and into the lower lands, but hid behind a tree after realising he was in the territory of the Slavic Alliance. He looked at the trident he was holding, then peeked back at the Alliance, but he was spotted by Nancy, who was keeping watch. She crept towards the tree, but Graham took off and she ran after him. She traced Graham for about 100 metres, then he suddenly stopped, turned around, and stabbed his trident into her upper arm. She tried to get at him with a throwing knife, but he pinned her by the arms against a tree. Graham promised to let her live if she let him have a little fun with her. Nancy called him a rotten, disgusting pig, but Graham told her to save the name calling for during the deed. As Graham came back to the cliff, he spotted Hubert from the Netherlands, sitting by the river with a fishing rod. After he was sure that Hubert hadn't noticed him, Graham stabbed him twice in the back, and when Hubert fell back, he stabbed him several more times in the chest. As he did this, Rosalina came storming out from behind a rock, yelling at Graham for stealing her kill. Rosalina had carried out her Samson and Delilah routine on 2 tributes during day 1, but had failed to get any more sponsors because viewers were getting bored of it. Graham said he didn't see her name on it, referring to Hubert's corpse, and Rosalina tried to come at him, but Graham smacked her in the side with the trident and she fell into the river. She screamed and waved her arms after being overwhelmed by the cold current, and Graham stabbed her in the head and neck multiple times. As her body went down the river, Graham shrugged at a nearby camera and said, "What can I say? I'm not into crazies." By now, Sarah and Lauren had come down the hill to see what was going on, and noticed that the trident was covered in blood. Graham looked at them and said, "We need to move, too many folks around here." As Nancy finished her shift, daylight awoke the rest of the Alliance. She did not tell them about the incident the night before, and she used her jacket to cover her bandaged wound. The other members were surprised when she proceeded to win sponsor packages from Belgium and Germany. The Slavic Alliance spent most of day 2 hunting for tributes, but were unsuccessful because most of them were too far away. They almost encountered the Greek and Cypriot tributes, but the two girls saw them coming and kept moving. The only other tribute to die on day 2 was Sarah, who lost her grip while climbing the cliffs and fell 4 meters, breaking her neck. Graham and Lauren rushed back down to find her limbs were all paralysed. Graham told Sarah they would bring her somewhere safe, but after crying for a bit, Sarah told her allies that she was ready to die. Graham protested against this, but Sarah said she was in a lot of pain and just wanted it to be over. Graham told her they didn't exactly have a humane way to kill her, and Sarah told her to just stab her with the trident. Lauren said goodbye to Sarah, and with a deep breath, Graham lifted the trident and pierced Sarah in the heart. Graham had tears running down his face and seemed genuinely distraught, which surprised and confused viewers. Vitek once again took the first watch shift of the night, but during this time Anton from Slovakia awoke from his sleep and realised that his Polish comrade was missing. In panic, he woke up the rest of the group, and they heard the mediocre crow imitation and decided to follow it. They caught Vitek right as he handed Attila some bread from one of the 7 sponsor packages Nancy received that day. Vitek hesitated to come up with an excuse, but as the others held up their weapons to Attila, he admitted the two of them were in a side alliance. Vitek pleaded for the rest of the Slavic alliance to include Attila in their group, reminding them of the charity work he'd done with the blind. Anton asked if they could discuss it amongst themselves, and the 4 of them got into a huddle and whispered to each other. When they parted, they said Attila could join their alliance. Vitek and Attila's faces briefly lit up at this, when the other 4 suddenly knocked Vitek to the ground, crouched down around him, and proceeded to stab every single part of his body. When the 4 got back up, Attila stared at them in shock, when Anton grabbed him by the arm and told him to keep up slowpoke. During the early sunrise, Graham once again went on a walk with the trident, this time staying up high in the mountains. After a while, he noticed 2 girls nearby, Marietta from Greece, who was asleep, and Sophia from Cyprus, who was on watch. He licked his lips as he got closer, and just as he spoke one word, Sophia threw a spear without bothering to stand up, and it hit Graham in the stomach. Despite the horrifying initiation ceremony, Attila quickly bonded with the Slavic Alliance and got on especially well with Veska from Bulgaria, who was into environmental activism. Anton, who seemed to emerge as the new leader, started to discuss the plan for today, when Ines suddenly screamed. The other Alliance members looked at her, and she said she felt something sharp in her shoulder. Just then, a spear came flying out of nowhere and went right through her neck. Everyone was in shock and ran around trying to find where the spear had come from, when they were suddenly showered with sharp rocks. After the close encounter the day before, Marietta and Sophia discovered where the Slavic Alliance was hiding and spent hours sharpening rocks to throw at them the next day. The Alliance ran around screaming and used their backpacks as shields as they tried to figure out the source of the projectiles, though the rocks continued to poke holes in their clothes and cause smaller cuts. Soon Anton spotted Sophia and readied his bow and arrow to shoot at her. Before he had a chance, she hurled another rock which hit him in the eye. He swore in pain, but shot some arrows anyway, and none of them came close to hitting her. Vaska and Attila grabbed his arms and sat him down by a tree. Nancy went to get him a bandage, only to spot Marietta running off with half their supplies. She tried throwing a knife at her, but it fell short of Marietta's sprinting. As Veska covered his eye, Anton announced that he had a new plan, but before he could explain what it was, he let out a groan from his headache. Attila told him to relax for a bit, and the rest of them would think of something. Lauren woke up and was shocked to find both Graham and the trident missing. In their place was a package with the Irish flag on it. She opened it up and found a thermos box that contained a full fry breakfast, complete with fried eggs, baked beans, sausages, bacon, fried tomatoes, and black pudding. Having eaten nothing but berries for the last 2 days, Lauren saw no option but to wolf it all down. When she was finished, Lauren's lips had gone dry from all the salt, and she started to descend the hill to the river. She knew it would be unsafe to go down the cliff unarmed, so she stuck to parts that were more jagged and less likely to expose her to other tributes from far away. As she came closer to the river, she noticed another figure nearby. She tried to hide, but when she noticed the other figure doing the same, they tried to approach each other. After cupping her hands to drink from the river, Monique from France revealed that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She received a sponsor package early on day 1 and stayed in the same spot in hopes of getting another one, but no luck. After taking a drink herself, Lauren told her there was a raspberry bush not far from them. Monique said she didn't think raspberries grew in this terrain, and Lauren reminded her that they were still in Brussels and the arena was just designed to simulate a Scandinavian fjord. As morning turned into afternoon, the Slavic Alliance continued to brainstorm their next move. Nancy tried to wake up Anton, who had passed out on the ground, but he wouldn't budge. Nancy told the other two that Anton was dead, but Attila checked his pulse and said it was still beating. Attila said he knew of people who became blind after getting eye injuries, and it could cause brain damage if left untreated. Veska asked if Anton was dying, and Attila said he may be, but it was best to let him die in peace as long as he was unconscious. Nancy pointed out that as long as Anton was still alive, the staff wouldn't take him away, and so began another brainstorming session. Marietta and Sophia went back to the cliffs and indulged in their successful kill and supplies they had stolen. Marietta spotted a figure down by the other side of the river, and Sophia recognised it as Anton after spotting the bandage on his eye, and suggested he must have been collecting water for his team. Marietta bet Sophia the next sponsor package that she could hit Anton with an arrow from where they were sitting, and Sophia said she was on. Marietta slowly readied the bow and arrow, then it flew down the cliff, across the river, and hit Anton in the chest. He flopped to one side and blood came pouring out. The rest of the Slavic Alliance, who had been hiding behind nearby bushes, groaned in frustration. The plan had been to use Anton as bait so other tributes would come over and try and kill him, and they'd blown it. The three of them didn't dare leave their hiding places out of fear that Marietta and Sophia would spot them too. Anton soon succumbed to his injuries and some staff members came to take away his body. As day turned to night, the hosts of Europa Games Extra were excited about the prospect of the games going to day 4 for the first time ever. Castus and Albin took fan requests for the third installment of Cheer Up Lazarus, and the one they went with was for Castus to do Albin's makeup. Lazarus watched with the driest expression as Castus put red lipstick, pink blush, and black eyeliner on Albin's face. Castus picked up an eyeshadow palette and asked Lazarus if he thought blue was Albin's colour. Lazarus stood up, grabbed the makeup brush and palette, and flung it across the studio. He proceeded to yell, "You think this is all fun and games? There are kids dying in that arena. What is wrong with you?" He kicked his chair to the ground and stormed off set. Castus and Albin looked at each other in shock, but soon composed themselves and carried on with the show. When the episode was over, they went to Lazarus' room to see if he was alright. Lazarus let them in and said he shouldn't have got mad at them. They didn't create the Europa Games, and he knew it was the reason they found their happy endings. The two of them were confused by the statement, and Castus said that may have been true to some extent, but the Europa Games was still the hardest thing he ever had to go through, and he still had nightmares about Vivi falling from the burning platform. Albin agreed, saying he was traumatized from watching his allies die one by one, but also from killing other tributes who were just trying to survive. As they recounted the horrors of their games, Castus and Albin both burst into tears, and Lazarus held out his arms and brought them both in for a hug. He smiled and said they had cheered him up by just being honest. As night fell, the loudspeaker announced the deaths of Vitek from Poland, Graham from Scotland, Anton from Slovakia, and Ines from Slovenia. It also announced that every country had sent in a sponsor package, so there would be no more. In her last sponsor package, Marietta received a torch, so she and Sophia decided to go hunting for tributes in the dark. Veska, who was keeping watch, spotted the light from far away and woke up her allies to warn them. They decided to go down the cliff and assume a position close to the Greek duo. The three of them ended up behind a bush, and Nancy crawled down to a rock that Sophia and Marietta were just about to pass by. Nancy suddenly popped up and threw her knife, which hit Sophia in the stomach. Marietta screamed and sprinted off as she switched off the torch, narrowly dodging weapons thrown by Veska and Attila. Veska took the knife out of Sophia's stomach and handed it back to Nancy, who celebrated getting her first kill. Attila told her to ration her enthusiasm and beckoned for them to follow him back up the cliff. The next morning, the Slavic Alliance went back to the forest to check on some traps they'd set a couple of days earlier, the classic hole covered in sticks and leaves. They found Lauren and Monique down one of the holes and fast asleep, though they did wake up briefly as Attila stabbed at them with a sword. This left Marietta as their sole remaining opponent. The three of them brainstormed where she could be and speculated that she may have been planning another sneak attack, so they decided to go out in the open to look for her. Marietta was high up in the cliffs, trying to look for other survivors, when she saw the Slavic Alliance running up towards her. She tried to get away, but they covered all directions. She held out a trident and a knife, but the other three didn't seem fazed by them. She shouted, "Game on," and suddenly ran for Nancy with her trident aimed at her chest, but Nancy reacted in time and stabbed Marietta twice in the chest with her knife. A few seconds later, Attila got her in the back with his sword, and Veska delivered blows to her head with her mace. As they wiped their weapons on the grass, it occurred to them that they were the only three left. They all took a defensive stance and held out their armaments. 30 seconds passed without anyone making a move, when Attila noticed Veska's eyes darting back and forth between her opponents. He gasped and said there was no way Veska was thinking of killing him first, reminding her of their common interest in activism and how much they'd bonded. Nancy countered by pointing out that she and Veska had been allies from the start and were both Slavic sisters. While Nancy was in the middle of making her plea, Attila suddenly ran at Veska and plunged his sword through her chest. Nancy stared in shock for a moment, then she shook her head and used the opportunity to stab Attila in the back with her knife. Attila's eyes went wide as he realized his grave mistake, but it was too late and he and Veska died within seconds of each other. Nancy's face went completely pale as she took her knife out of Attila's back and gazed at it in her hand. The loudspeaker announced that Nancy was the winner of the 4th Europa Games, and one of the staff members would escort her out. It is of note that this was the first Games where the winner's announcement was accompanied by The Winner Takes It All by Swedish pop group ABBA, which has since remained an annual tradition. Nancy was taken to hospital to treat the stab wound on her arm. One of the nurses offered her a pregnancy test, and it came back negative. During the winner's interview, Nancy went into great detail about how she felt watching both her allies and opponents die, but when Graham Norton tried to steer the conversation towards her encounter with Graham, Nancy put her head in her hands and said she didn't want to talk about it. The host assured her that he and the other Grahams of the world did not claim him as one of them. Towards the end of the interview, Graham asked her what she would do when she saw her family again, and Nancy said she would give them a big hug and tell them all how much she loved them. Suddenly, the audience cheered as Nancy's mother and 3 siblings walked on stage. Nancy ran towards them and joined in their hug, but was sobbing too much to speak any words. After a minute, she composed herself and congratulated her mother on achieving her dream of being on TV. Her mother told her there was only one thing left to do, and the 5 of them subjected the audience to a slightly off-key rendition of Julie by Belgian-Montenegrin singer Daniel Popovic. The 5th Europa Games lasted 4 days and had 29 tributes. Fiona Donovan was born in New Zealand, but when she was 5, her family returned to their country of ancestry and settled in the small town of Doneraile in County Cork. She had been eligible for every reaping since the games began, having turned 13 shortly before the first Europa Games. Every year, she and her family drove to Mallow and stood in the town centre as the tributes for the games were announced. Fiona found the whole ordeal scary for the first couple of years, but by the age of 17 she had become desensitized to it, realizing the extremely low odds of being chosen over thousands of other teenagers. So, when she was announced as the Irish tribute, she was too stunned to move, and the other girls started to shove her forward. During the goodbye with her parents and younger brother, they urged her to win the games, reminding her of her talents that would come in handy in the arena. Fiona grew up picking berries and mushrooms in the wilderness around her town, and was physically strong from helping to harvest wheat on her family farm. Ireland finished in 12th place in the 4th Europa Games, but since only one Big Four country finished in the top 11, we got relegated to the semi-final the following year. The semi-finals had more or less remained the same since the 3rd Games, being preceded by 1 day of training. The training day was commenced with Ceastas and Albin welcoming the tributes to the centre and giving a quick rundown of the different stations. Ceastas expressed delight at there finally being a female winner of the games and begged the tributes of this year to help continue to balance it out, or the winner's circle would turn into a fraternity. Since Scotland and Malta were already automatically qualified, Fiona sought out allies to get her through the next round, mingling with tributes from countries who didn't have regional alliances to fall back on, such as Zuzi from Liechtenstein and Bogdan from Romania. There was worry among the tributes due to all 6 members of the Northern Alliance being in the semi-final. This included members within the alliance, who remembered the disastrous performance from the previous year and questioned whether maintaining such a big group was worth the target on their backs. The semi-final had taken place in the same school gym arena since the 2nd Games, and the 5th edition was no exception. The semi-final of the 5th Games remains the shortest in the competition's history, clocking at only 3 minutes and 41 seconds. During the scramble to grab weapons, the Austrian and Belgian tributes became the first 2 casualties, continuing their countries' respective failed qualification streaks. The other tributes tried to target members of the Northern Alliance before they could get into formation, but to no avail. The rest of the tributes soon turned on each other, with the Benelux Alliance becoming the new targets. However, in a shocking turn of events, the 3 Baltic tributes literally stabbed their Nordic allies in the back. Only Jana, from Sweden, noticed what was going on in time and ran away. The Baltics chased after her, with Nina, from Lithuania, right at her tail. Jana ran past Fiona, who stuck out her leg to make Nina trip and fall to the ground. As Nina tried to get up, Fiona hurled a throwing knife which landed near Nina's shoulder blade. However, at the same time, the Luxembourgian tribute was bludgeoned to death by Zuzi and Bogdan. As the intercom announced that the semi-final was over, paramedics rushed in to carry Nina out on a stretcher. Nina yelled at Fiona, calling her a moron and telling her she hoped she would enjoy her 1-minute penalty. As the rest of the tributes filed out of the arena, Jonna thanked Fiona for saving her life and said she owed her one. After reviewing the footage, head trainer, Frederic Articcioni, announced that since Fiona's knife left her hand before the Luxembourgian tribute died, she had not broken any rules and would not receive a 1-minute penalty in the grand final. This was the first edition of the Europa Games where Denmark failed to qualify to the grand final, while it was the first time that an associate member made it through the semis. As was customary, the 10 qualifying tributes into the rec room of the training arena one by one. Fiona was the second to go in, much to the delight of Bianca from Malta and Gareth from Scotland. The three of them agreed to keep the Brexit alliance going, despite the unsavoury actions of past tributes. The automatic qualifiers had not watched the semi-final, but news quickly spread about the actions of the Baltic alliance. Fiona was assigned to share a room with Lorenza from Italy, who proved herself to be one of the criers of this year's games. She said that the incident proved that nobody, not even the established alliances, could trust each other. In the morning, Fiona was serving herself breakfast when Nina came over and deliberately spilled orange juice on her. The evening before, Nina was rushed to hospital and had to get 2 stitches. Fiona ate breakfast with Bianca and Gareth and convinced them to welcome Jonna into the alliance, reasoning that they would gain Albin as their mentor. The two of them agreed and invited Jonna to have breakfast with them. Albin was happy to guide them through their training, though he wasn't happy about having to work opposite Kiastis for the first time. Kiastis was pissed at the Baltics for killing their allies and made his feelings known. Nina insisted that the games had changed a lot since he was in them, and it was important to adapt. Kiastis and Nina butted heads throughout training, and Nina insisted that he was only picking on her because she was an ethnic Russian. This wasn't the only problem within the Baltic Alliance. Heli, from Estonia, and Georgis, from Latvia, both had a tendency to stay up late and take naps during the day, which frequently disrupted training. During the interviews, Graham Norton brought up the Nordic Purge to all 3 of the Baltic tributes. Both Heli and Georgios insisted that they just did what Nina told them, while Nina went into a lot more detail about the rationale behind the plan. She thought going into the grand final with such a huge alliance would put a target on their back, reminding the people of Europe what had happened the year before. She also wanted to show the other tributes that the Baltic Alliance meant business this year. Graham also asked her if she thought having unhealed stitches would put her at a disadvantage in the game, to which Nina proclaimed that the rest of the tributes would wish they only had stitches when she was finished with them. The members of the Brexit Alliance all had interesting interviews in their own right. Fiona went into her deep connection with nature, Jonna talked about her interest in making electronic music, and Bianca said she did yoga to escape the money and politics that festered the entire world. Gareth's interview was incredibly awkward. He wasn't much of a talker in general, but sitting in front of a live audience left him with very few words. Graham used the screen behind them to display social media posts of fangirls gushing about Gareth's good looks, which made him blush, and all he could mumble was, "Thanks, girls." During the final evening, Fiona and Jonna found Bianca and Gareth in the rec room and told them it was time for an alliance meeting. On their way to Fiona's room, Bianca came up beside them while Gareth trailed behind. Bianca revealed to the other 2 girls that she and Gareth had kissed. Fiona and Jonna already knew that Bianca had a crush on him and asked what it was like, and Bianca said that Gareth had so much confidence when it came to making love, and it was like his shy exterior had melted away. Fiona reminded her that there could only be one winner, and Bianca needed to stay focused. In the morning, the 24 tributes were loaded onto a coach and brought to the arena. The outfit this year was a nylon top and running shorts. Each tribute was blindfolded and brought to a circular room. They were told that they were standing on a platform that would rise into the arena, and to make sure not to lose their balance. When the platform was finished rising, the voiceover went through the usual procedure of reminding tributes of the rules of the games and counting down from 30. The arena this year was made up of a bunch of small, scattered islands, with a large beach surrounded by vegetation visible in the distance. The heart of the arena was a large circular island, shaped similarly to the one the year before. The Baltic Alliance had made plans to take control of the arena, but after members of the Slavic Alliance attempted to throw weapons at Nina from far away, she yelled at her allies to retreat, and they swam away to another island. The Slavic Alliance also found themselves to be major targets during this portion of the game. Adelina from Bulgaria and Olivier from Poland got into an argument in the middle of the battlefield over whether to leave the heart or keep gathering supplies, but after the latter got shot by an arrow to the head, the rest of the alliance followed Adelina's lead and made a swim for it. 5 tributes died in the bloodbath that year, which was the lowest yet, though it did see the early demise of the Greek alliance. The members of the Brexit Alliance left the heart early, after each grabbing one weapon or backpack, and settled on a nearby island. Jonna noticed that only one person was left in the heart, and they appeared to be hoarding all the remaining supplies. The tribute in question was Melissa from France, and when she saw the Brexiteers swimming back, she jumped into the water with a backpack on each shoulder. By the time Bianca, Fiona, Gareth, and Jonna had arrived back at the heart, Melissa was too far away to be attacked, so the four of them got to raiding the rest of the supplies. Meanwhile, Nina sat on some random island and watched in frustration as she waited for her allies to catch up to her. They were actually swimming at a reasonable pace, but this evidently wasn't good enough for her. When they finally arrived, Nina put on a forced smile and suggested they split up to cover more ground. Heli and Georgios asked if they could stay together, to which Nina agreed, and the two groups swam off in different directions. Despite working together in the semis, Bogdan from Romania and Zuzi from Liechtenstein parted ways in the training centre after the latter joined an alliance with Noah from Germany and Samuel from Hungary. After they left the heart, Bogdan stayed on their trail by hiding underwater. When they reached a faraway island, Bogdan emerged from the water and chucked a knife right at Zuzi's neck. The other two jumped back into the water, but they weren't able to swim away fast enough, and Bogdan threw more knives and fatally stabbed both their skulls. As he took a moment to catch his breath, Bogdan realised that the Dutch tribute, Sjoerd, was standing on the other side of the island, and aiming his bow and arrow right at him. Sjoerd told him that he liked his style, and asked if he wanted to team up, and Bogdan agreed as the two of them slowly put down their weapons. Sjoerd made waves in the interviews after stating that he didn't think it was immoral to kill people, and the Europa Games were only appealing to human nature. He had already killed 3 tributes himself, including 2 members of the Slavic Alliance. Melissa from France was the first tribute to arrive at the shore. Still carrying her 2 backpacks, she ran to the vegetation to find somewhere to hide. The Slavic Alliance arrived soon after, just in time for an armed staff member to present them with a package with the Austrian flag in it, the first sponsor gift. As the day continued, the Brexit, Baltic, and Iberian alliances all received 1 sponsor package each, but it was Bogdan and Sjoerd who were spoiled with snacks and weapons by the viewing public. The duo developed a niche fanbase after killing so many tributes early on in the game. As the sky became dark, the Brexit alliance was still in the heart, and they agreed to sleep in shifts in case they were approached. Fiona took the first shift, and after just over 2 hours, she woke up Bianca and told her it was her turn next. While Fiona and Jonna huddled together for warmth, Gareth laid on his belly about 5 meters away. Once Bianca was sure Fiona was asleep, she tapped Gareth on the chest a few times and asked him if he wanted to have some fun. As they began to make out, the loudspeaker announced the names and nationalities of the 9 tributes who died in the first day, beginning with Cyprus and concluding with Slovakia. Bianca and Gareth took off each other's outfits, and as they got down to serious business, they didn't notice Nina swimming towards the island, spear in her right hand. She had the intention of killing Jonna to finish what she had started, but as she approached with her spear, Bianca noticed her and let out a gasp. In a moment of panic, Nina chucked the spear at the lovers and jumped back in the water. Fiona and Jonna both woke up from all the commotion, and Bianca let out a long squeak when she realised the spear had landed in Gareth's chest and punctured his lung. In a whisper, Gareth began to recite some cheesy love poem where he complimented the features of Bianca's face. She said she would never forget him, and she kissed him full on the lips. Fiona asked Jonna if Bianca was in fact completely naked, and Jonna shushed back and said to let her have her moment. As the sun began to rise, Heli from Estonia and Georgios from Latvia arrived on the shore of the beach. Georgios asked if anyone was already there, and Heli said the beach was pretty big and there were likely tributes hiding somewhere. They proceeded to get into a debate over whether it would have been possible for a tribute to bury themselves in the sand when they were spotted by Matija from Croatia. She had been keeping watch on behalf of the Slavic Alliance and stood about a metre deep into the vegetation that surrounded the beach. Matija watched Heli and Georgios for over an hour as they built an elaborate fort in the sand, with steps on each side to allow for projectiles to be thrown from all directions. As they finished off the last wall, Heli spotted Matija with her peripheral vision. She whispered to Georgios that someone was watching them and told him to follow her lead. They made their way across the beach and picked up shells, as if they were going to use them to decorate the fort. Matija started to edge backwards out of fear of being spotted when Heli and Georgios suddenly ran towards her. Matija ran off and started to shout "bike" over and over. She suffered from a condition where she was only able to say one word, which was thought to be a result of past trauma. Matija was trying to get the attention of her allies, but they were too far away to be awoken by the noise. Heli managed to grab onto Matija's hair and told Georgios, "She's all yours." While they did not acquire any weapons in the heart, they were fortunate that the people of Estonia and Latvia had awarded their sponsor packages back to back in the early hours of day 2, granting them a sword each. Once they'd lost count of how many times they'd stabbed Matija, Heli and Georgios decided to catch up on some sleep. Both of them had stayed awake up until this point of the games, save for a brief nap the previous afternoon, though they agreed to sleep in shifts in case anyone approached their fort. Fiona took the fourth and final shift for her alliance and woke them up shortly before 8 a.m. They were still distraught over Garrett's death, but Fiona convinced them to go hunting for other tributes. Jana and Bianca had concerns about doing so, since the tributes on the other islands would be able to see and hear them coming, but Fiona assured them that she had a plan. Meanwhile, Sjord and Bogdan, who had spent the night in the bushes on the far end of the beach, went for a walk along the sand with the aim of welcoming any incoming arrivals. Both of them collapsed with laughter upon spotting the fort. Sjord put on a baby voice and mocked the Baltics for making a sand castle. Georgios peered down at them and held out his sword, warning them not to come any closer. The two of them continued to laugh, and Sjord said sandcastles were only good for one thing, being knocked down. He and Bogdan both ran from different sides and bashed through the walls of the fort. Georgios aimed his sword at Bogdan, and the latter realised that his knife was no match for the former's sword, so he chose to run. Meanwhile, Heli was still in the process of waking up, and didn't have time to react before Sjord grabbed her sword and stabbed her through the neck. Sjord left the fort to see Georgios coming to chase Bogdan down the beach. Sjord reasoned that there was nothing he could do about the situation, and went back into the vegetation to find somewhere to hide. He hid between some bushes less than 10 metres away from Melissa, though neither of them noticed each other. The Brexit Alliance had spent several hours hopping from island to island, though the only tribute they'd encountered was Nina, who saw them coming and quickly swam away. They were about to give up on their hunting plans when Jonna noticed two figures on a distant island. Fiona told her allies to get in the water before they saw them, and quickly went back over their strategy. Dora from Portugal and Antonieta from Spain were having a pretty chill morning. They had just received a sponsor package and enjoyed a breakfast of bread, ham, cheese, and coffee. Dora realised that there was someone swimming in the distance. This wasn't the first person they encountered that day, as Nina had also swum by an hour earlier, but she didn't come near them. The two girls held out their weapons as the figure came closer. They realised it was the Swedish tribute, Jonna, and she was carrying a trident. Jonna continued to swim towards them, and they swung their weapons about in preparation. They didn't realise that Fiona and Bianca were sneaking up behind them and stabbed them both right through the back. The girls were satisfied that their plan had worked, though also horrified at the sight of the dead tributes, and they rolled their bodies into the water so the staff members could collect them somewhere else. As the sun set on day 2, Nina arrived on the shore of the beach after spotting the sand fort from a distant island. As she swam over, she voiced how she couldn't wait to slaughter whatever idiot had constructed it. She ran into the side of the structure, but the walls were a lot thicker than she expected, and she ended up falling over. This woke up Georgios, who was taking a nap on the inside, and he went up the makeshift steps with his sword. Nina put her arms to her face and told him to stop pointing at her, and Georgios dropped it when he realised who it was. Georgios said he was glad to see her, and Nina impatiently asked him where Heli was. Georgios sorrowfully told her that Heli had been killed, and Nina swiftly moved on to asking Georgios how many tributes he had killed. Georgios said he had killed 2 tributes, and Nina responded with 3, when she had in fact only killed 1. Georgios told her that Sjord was the one who killed Heli, and he had gone back into the vegetation. Nina asked in frustration what Georgios was lazing around out here for, and insisted that they had to go kill him. Georgios was reluctant to do so, but Nina grabbed his arm and dragged him into the bushes. Sjord had heard them arguing, and no sooner were they 5 metres into the woods, Sjord's right arm emerged from a bush and he threw a knife at Georgios' head. As he collapsed to the ground, Nina grabbed his sword and made a run for it, but Sjord continued to follow her. He said he liked the move that she pulled in the semis and offered an alliance. Nina aimed her sword at him and he ducked into a bush. Sjord pointed out that there were still 10 tributes left. Side note, there were actually 8, and it would be hard to defeat them alone. Nina yelled at him to get lost, and Sjord said the offer was still open if she changed her mind. One of the camera people followed Nina and asked why she turned down the alliance, and Nina said she thought Sjord was psychotic and she wasn't taking her chance with someone who enjoyed playing this game. At midnight, the loudspeaker announced the names of the 7 tributes who died that day. Matija from Croatia, Heli from Estonia, Georgios from Latvia, Dora from Portugal, Bogdan from Romania, Gareth from Scotland, and Antonieta from Spain. As the sun rose on day 3, the last 2 members of the Slavic Alliance remained in the same hiding place they had been in for the last 24 hours. Fabian from Slovenia had spent much of the games awkwardly trying to make moves on Adelina from Bulgaria, to the point where audience members anticipated whether Adelina would crack and murder him herself. The only food they had eaten came from a Czech sponsor package that was delivered at 9 PM the previous evening. After Nina came very close to discovering them, they decided to move somewhere else. But during their walk, they accidentally set off a trap that had been built by Sjord and Bogdan. A makeshift wooden crate emptied an assortment of large and medium-sized rocks on their heads, leading them to scream and become disorientated. Both Nina and Sjoerd heard the commotion came at them from different sides. Adelina and Fabian tried to run off but ended up colliding with each other. Sjoerd threw a knife at Adelina's head and Nina stabbed both of them with her sword multiple times. Once they had finished them off, Sjoerd looked at Nina with a cheeky expression. Nina sighed and said she was only agreeing to an alliance because 3 of the Brexiteers were still alive. She also asked Sjoerd if she knew which other tribute was still remaining, and Sjoerd said he had no idea. Sjoerd asked if he could stay in the fort, and Nina said he could have it to himself if it meant being away from her. More sponsor packages arrived for both alliances throughout the morning, with Sjoerd and Nina both being gifted with more throwing knives. Bianca, Fiona and Jonna arrived on the shore around 1:30 p.m. after spotting the sand fort in the distance. Sjoerd gleefully announced that it was showtime as he stood at the top of the steps in the fort. The 3 girls approached the fort from different sides and sliced at the sand with their weapons to try and make a hole. While they were turned away, Nina emerged from the vegetation and threw a knife at Jonna, which landed in her upper arm. Jonna screamed and ran away, and Bianca and Fiona abandoned the fort and ran after Nina. They shouted at Jonna that they had her back, and she suddenly stopped and chucked her spear at Nina's chest, the same spear that Nina tried to kill her with on the first night. The stab wasn't deep enough to reach Nina's lungs, but she was suddenly tackled to the ground by Bianca and Fiona. Nina yelled at Sjoerd to help her, but he just leaned his elbows in the fort and said, "I miss out on some girl-on-girl action? I don't think so." As Nina gasped her last breath, Sjoerd leapt out of the fort and ran into the vegetation, though the girls spotted him just in time and ran after. Sjoerd took heavy breaths as he ran through the bushes, trying to find a place to camp, when he suddenly heard someone sneeze. He looked around and asked if anyone was there, then he held out his sword and started looking through the bushes. He said he didn't want to hurt them, and warned the person that 3 allies were coming in this direction. Before he could say anything else, the Brexiteers snuck up behind him and Jonna stabbed him in the head. He fell to the ground, and the girls stabbed him a few more times until they were sure he was gone. They all took deep breaths, and Bianca asked how many tributes were left. Jonna said she wasn't sure, and Fiona said with confidence that there was one other tribute left, and she'd been counting. They continued to look through the vegetation, when Bianca suddenly stabbed Jonna in the heart. Fiona looked back in shock, and Bianca said that she was just putting her out of her misery. Fiona countered that Jonna's arm injury wasn't close to fatal, and Bianca admitted that she wasn't taking her chances with the 3-way showdown, in reference to what happened to Attila the previous year. Fiona threw Jonna's spear at Bianca, but she dodged, but as she was doing that, Fiona grabbed Bianca's trident out of her hand and threw it on the ground. She chased her through the vegetation and dived to grab her by the shoulders. Bianca screamed as Fiona wrapped her arms around her neck and choked her to death. As Bianca's body flopped to the ground, the loudspeaker congratulated the final 2 tributes, Fiona Donovan and Melissa Durand. Fiona is famously quoted as saying, "Melissa? Who the fuck is Melissa?" upon this announcement. The loudspeaker told them to report to the shore for the final showdown. Fiona debated to herself whether to use the weapon of one of her fallen allies, but ultimately decided to stick with her hatchet. Fiona arrived on the shore and took a few practice swings. After about 10 minutes, she asked if Melissa would be here soon. Another 20 minutes passed, and Fiona started to go up to the staff members and demand to know where Melissa was, to which the loudspeaker reminded her that interfering with staff members could result in being shot. Fiona let out a scream of frustration and announced that she was going to find Melissa herself and went to the water to swim to the nearest island. Fiona spent the rest of the day swimming from island to island to try and find her opponent, during which she received the last 3 sponsor packages. The Danish delegation tried to send Fiona a note informing her of Melissa's whereabouts, but this was forbidden by the rules of the games. As the day turned to night, Fiona did not go to sleep. She was too paranoid about Melissa suddenly doing a sneak attack on her, and at one point she even bit her own arm to make sure she stayed wide awake. As the sun began to rise again, Fiona continued swimming from island to island, getting further and further away from Melissa's hiding place in the vegetation. Soon, Fiona's exhaustion started to get the better of her, and at one point she had almost reached another island, but she misjudged her grip and fell deep into the water. She let out a muffled scream and waved her arms and legs about, but it was a tough battle against her lack of energy. She remained without oxygen for more than a minute, but she managed one more burst of strength, allowing her to resurface and paddle to the island. She immediately passed out on the sand and slept for 5 hours. The Brussels audience was outraged, with many demanding that Melissa be forced out of her hiding place, but at the time there was no way for the game makers to do this while keeping within the game's rules. When Fiona woke up, she decided that she'd had enough of searching the islands and went back to the shore to look through the vegetation. After over an hour of searching, Fiona accidentally set off a trap which had been built by Sjoerd on day 2, where a dagger swung across from a bush and plunged into Fiona's chest. Tears fell from Fiona's eyes, crying that this wasn't fair, and she was so close to getting out. And so, the 5th Europa Games were won by Melissa Durand from France. Her time in the games could be summed up in a single paragraph. She initially left the heart, then swam back to get 2 backpacks. After island hopping for a bit, she reached the shore and went to hide in a large clump of bushes. She used a sickle to carve out a space for herself and spent the next 4 days consuming small rations of water and dry food. She did not receive any sponsor packages and was not responsible for anyone's deaths. When she arrived on stage for her winner's interview, Melissa was booed loudly by the audience. She talked about how she was a pacifist and had never had any plans to kill other tributes. When Graham pointed out that she had never hinted at this in her initial interview, Melissa shrugged and said that the greatest resistance was the quietest. She stood up from her armchair and started to give a speech about how the Europa Games should be abolished, but she was subsequently seized and taken off the stage by security. Melissa's victory became a massive scandal for the Games, and in subsequent editions, game makers took every measure to make sure tributes couldn't leave the arena without killing someone. Despite being a widely unpopular winner, Melissa was hailed as a national hero when she returned to France, and was nicknamed Joan of Arc because the rest of the continent would have loved to see her get burnt at the stake. At the age of 23, Melissa had an unplanned pregnancy, and moved to the Principality of Monaco to protect her kids from exposure to the Games. The 6th Europa Games lasted 3 days and were won by Lasma Liepinch, aged 16, from Latvia. Latvia was automatically qualified to the final, and after the 10 semi-final qualifiers were revealed in the rec room, Lasma was dismayed to find out that Timo, from Estonia, had collaborated with the Nordic Alliance in the semi-finals, which this year included Norway. During breakfast on the first day, the Nordics plus Estonia ate at the same table when they were approached by Lasma and Vitalia from Lithuania, who thanked them for helping Timo get through to the next round, but the Baltics and Nordics were going to part ways. Timo was hesitant to move, and Janne from Finland objected that Timo had the right to choose for himself. Lasma said it was a pretty simple decision. Estonia is a Baltic country, therefore it belongs in the Baltic Alliance, to which Janne pointed out that Estonia was culturally very different from Latvia and Lithuania, and had more in common with Finland. Lasma countered that the Europa Games wasn't some cutesy cultural event and literally a matter of life and death, and the previous Baltic tributes had killed off the Nordics for a reason. And Janne responded that this showed that the alliances were evolving, and maybe it was time for Estonia to move on. Lasma glared at Timo and said he had 10 seconds to get up from the table, or he'd seal the fate of not just himself, but the Estonian tributes that would come after him. After she got to the number 3, Timo got up and apologised to the Nordics. As the Baltics walked away, Janne said loudly that Lasma and Vitalia hadn't even taken part in the Games yet, while the Nordics proved firsthand that they had his back, but this fell on deaf ears. The Baltic Alliance met up with Kiastus during the first training session. He was not happy that they had chosen to remain split from the Nordics, and he and Lasma got into a huge argument. Ultimately, Kiastus told him that if they didn't team up with the Nordic Alliance, he would refuse to mentor them. Lasma immediately told him to go ahead, and they could train themselves without him. Kiastus stuck by his word and joined Albin in mentoring the Nordic Alliance. While Albin was happy not to be working opposite Kiastus this year, he told him in private that he thought he was being childish and it wasn't right not to mentor his own state. Kiastus countered that the Baltics were sabotaging themselves by staying separate, and they could forget about winning again until they changed their mind. The Nordic Alliance got along well with Kiastus, and he took a particular liking to Mateusz from Norway. Mateusz confided in Kiastus that he was great at getting what he wanted due to his good looks and mysterious persona, and Kiastus offered him advice on how to best utilise this ability in the arena. Another incident occurred in training when Denise from Ireland stormed over to the plant station, where Melissa was busy mentoring the French tribute. Denise yelled at the previous year's winner for being a coward and robbing Fiona of her life, and she started to use swear words when she was dragged away by 2 assistant trainers. As the training days went by, Lasma refused to change her mind and took the role of training the other members of the Baltic Alliance herself. Her brash approach went down well with Vitalia from Lithuania, who was an accomplished academic and valued a disciplined environment. However, Lasma clashed with Timo from Estonia, who had trouble keeping up with her intense routines. During training, he routinely complained about experiencing headaches and fatigue, and an anonymous acquaintance revealed that he was an alcoholic and likely going through withdrawal symptoms. Lasma often reminded her allies to show no mercy in the arena and always be prepared to defend their lives. As usual, the interviews were conducted in alphabetical order of country. The first tribute to be interviewed, Siegmund from Austria, was asked about his piano playing. The interview ended soon after, and a grand piano was brought on stage so Siegmund could demonstrate his skills, which went down a treat with the Brussels audience. Frida, from Denmark, caused the audience to laugh when she talked about an ex-boyfriend, confessing that she dumped him because she was jealous of his dog. Timo was unsurprisingly asked if he regretted his decision to switch alliances after the semis. Timo did not directly answer the question, and instead made the mistake of complaining about Lasma's no-mercy attitude, saying he believed love was the strongest force of all. This corny statement caused loud groans in the Brussels audience. Janne, from Finland, talked about how he had been obsessed with creating his own weather from a young age, and he used to spend hours doing homemade science experiments such as making tornadoes out of vinegar and clouds out of ice cubes and hairspray. He confessed that he liked to put metal rods in his garden to attract lightning, though he had yet to be successful with this experiment. Graham asked him if he planned on making his own weather in the arena, and Yana said he would definitely do so. Denise from Ireland remained fiery as ever, voicing how she thought Maylisa's victory was a disgrace to the Europa Games and no one would be hiding on her watch. Graham asked Denise if she thought she was at a disadvantage due to the Scottish tribute dying in the semis, to which Denise countered that Geoffrey from Malta was a fantastic ally and she couldn't have asked for a better one. Lasma's assessment of Kiastas was surprisingly positive, saying she respected him greatly as the first victor, but he couldn't understand that the games are constantly changing, and you couldn't always rely on the same old tricks. These comments were similar to the ones made by Nina, the previous year's Lithuanian tribute. Graham asked Lasma if she thought she could win the games. Lasma responded that she was confident she had what it took, but she didn't want to let her guard down, pointing out that this had been the downfall of some previous Latvian tributes. The last tribute to be interviewed was Esther from Sweden. When asked, Esther said she was 100% sure she would win the games, simply because she believed she would, and said she could make things happen by manifesting them. Graham appeared skeptical and asked Esther why she didn't manifest herself not getting drawn for the games at all, to which Esther responded that she saved manifestation for situations where the odds seem unfavourable. During the final evening, Timo was confronted by his allies over his comments about Lasma. Timo immediately got defensive and blamed it on nerves. Lasma put a hand on Timo's shoulder and told him that they may have had different opinions and beliefs, but they all shared the same goal. She told Timo that he needed to fully cooperate with them, or they would all be doomed. After a moment of silence, Timo said he agreed. Lasma grinned and brought her allies into a hug, squealing that they were going to dominate in the arena. The arena for the 6th Europa Games was a large cone-shaped tower with 20 floors. The participants were blindfolded and brought to the 10th floor by an elevator that was locked and concealed by a wall before the game started. A round room on the 10th floor functioned as the heart of the arena, but the tributes weren't told the ground floor was also filled with supplies, and the top floor had a lockable room with 2 beds. The first tribute to die was Carola from Germany, who was sliced across the neck and then stabbed by Lasma, who proceeded to grab the sleeping bag that she was holding. Germany became the first country to finish last twice in the Europa Games. The bloodbath that year was especially deadly due to multiple alliances attempting to hoard supplies. Strangely enough, the Nordic and Baltic alliances seemed to actively avoid each other. At one point, Vitalia accidentally bumped shoulders with Frida from Denmark, and then sprinted 5 meters to plunge the Italian tribute in the stomach with a sword. Some of the commentators speculated that the Northern Alliance had reunited in secret, while others believed that they viewed each other as too threatening and opted to weed out the weaker tributes instead. The Slavic alliance took a major toll in this early stage of the game. The Czech and Slovak tributes had already died in the semis, and by the end of the bloodbath, Mirella from Croatia was the only member who remained alive. She had run out of the room 30 seconds after the game started after grabbing one backpack. Another tribute who left immediately was Geoffrey from Malta, who swiftly ran through other rooms and became the first to reach another floor. His ally, Denise, had killed 2 tributes and stuffed a backpack full of weapons before she realised that Geoffrey was out of sight. She left the heart and ran down to the 9th floor, not realising that Geoffrey had gone the other way. Soon most of the other tributes had either died or fled, and most of the supplies were in 2 piles on opposite sides of the heart. The Nordic and Baltic alliances had survived the bloodbath completely intact and stared each other down as they guarded their loot. Yannick climbed on top of his alliance's pile and started shouting taunts at the Baltics, daring them to come over and fight them. Lasma yelled back at them to come over first, and Yannick pretended to yawn and said they were too tired. Not long after he said this, Esther noticed that Eulalia from Spain was peeking out from behind one of the arches, and swiftly chucked knives which landed in her neck and upper chest. Lasma smirked at Yana and said, "You were saying?" And Yana sighed and told the Baltic Alliance to go downstairs and leave them in peace. Eulalia became the 10th and final victim of the bloodbath. At that point in the games, Lasma had killed 3 tributes, Mateos and Denise had killed 2, and Yana, Esther, and Nicolette from Hungary had killed 1 each. Frida had killed 2 tributes in the semis, but had yet to kill 1 in the grand final. The Nordic-Baltic stalemate effectively left the other 7 remaining tributes trapped in one half of the tower or the other. Although the 10th floor was full of many different pathways between the interconnecting rooms, the heart was the only connection between the 9th and 11th floors. Because each floor of the tower had so many rooms, it took hours for any of the other tributes to encounter each other. After getting separated from Geoffrey, Denise spent hours scouring each floor to look for other tributes. She tried to be as thorough as possible to make sure nobody escaped her radar. About 5 hours into the first day, she spotted Mirella from Croatia hiding behind a metal cabinet on the 5th floor. Mirella tried to use her backpack as defense, but Denise grabbed it and flung it away. She proceeded to bludgeon Mirella with a hatchet a total of 37 times, screaming about how there would be no hider winning this year. Eugène from Luxembourg was the first tribute to reach the ground floor of the tower, where he was delighted to find it was full of weapons and supplies. He soon fell to the ground sobbing, and one of the camera people asked him how he felt. and he started blubbering about how he had lost his Belgian ally in the semis and his Dutch ally in the bloodbath, and finally the games had made it up to him. It soon dawned on Eugène that the room was surrounded by archers from all directions, and he got to work moving all of the supplies to a small room on the ground floor and barricading it. 4 tributes were stuck in the top half of the tower: Geoffrey from Malta, Nicolette from Hungary, Petros from Greece, and Siegmund from Austria. Since Geoffrey had left the heart immediately, he was without supplies or weapons. He was clearly in panic mode, pacing from room to room and not realizing how loud he was breathing. Petros reached the 13th floor and easily heard Geoffrey. He snuck through the arches, and when he was near enough, he roared to scare him. Geoffrey screamed and ran for his life as Petros chased him. Petros picked up a metal stool and hurled it at Geoffrey's shoulders, which made him fall to the ground. Geoffrey curled up in a corner as Petros wielded an axe, and he screamed and begged not to be killed. Suddenly, Petros started laughing, and told Geoffrey that he was his bitch now. Geoffrey had a puzzled look as Petros put down his axe and helped him up, telling him that he wasn't going to waste his time killing someone with no supplies. Geoffrey took a huge sigh of relief, and Petros asked him what happened to the Irish lass. Geoffrey said he had no idea where Denise had gone, or if she was still alive. Petros reasoned that she was an automatic qualifier, so her odds of dying in the bloodbath were much higher. Petros told Geoffrey that he was one of the last to leave the bloodbath, and he witnessed the Nordic and Baltic alliances having a standoff. His plan was to gather all the tributes in the top half of the tower and unite against them. Geoffrey voiced that he wasn't sure about the plan, and Petros reminded him that he could kill him at any second, so he didn't have a choice. Eventually, they reached the top of the tower and found that the sole room was locked. Siegmund and Nicolette made it to the 20th floor first and secured the 2 beds. The Austrian and Hungarian tributes had banded together since the semis, reawakening a long-lost alliance. The top floor was barely large enough to fit the 2 beds, and they had spent much of the first day talking about their interests and slowly eating the food they gathered in the heart. Siegmund was in the middle of mime-playing Hungarian Rhapsody when they heard a banging on the door. The 2 of them screamed, and Petros shouted back, assuring him that he wasn't going to kill them. Nicolette told him that he wasn't allowed in either way, and Petros said that was fine. He told them about the standoff and his ambush plan, but they weren't interested, telling him that it was his problem. Petros pointed out that the locked door wasn't exactly secure and could easily be broken through with a weapon, and they'd be cornered if someone got in. Nicolette insisted that they would be prepared to fight if that happened, and Siegmund told Petros that they weren't saying no to his plan, but he needed to drive a more convincing bargain. Petros sighed and said he would trade them Geoffrey. Geoffrey immediately objected, and Petros told him, "Silence, slave." Nicolette asked what they were supposed to do with Geoffrey, and Petros told them they could use him as bait or a human shield. He also made more not safe for work suggestions, and Siegmund told him to shut up and asked if they had any food or weapons. Petros ignored him and said he could wait them out for hours, to which Siegmund said that they could play a game in the meantime, and that he liked 20 questions. After spending hours inspecting virtually every room in the first 10 floors, Denise finally reached the bottom of the tower. She stepped into the big round room in the centre, which was still full of supplies. Eugène had left half the stock behind out of fear that he would take too long and someone else would arrive. Denise unzipped the backpack that she was carrying, threw out one of the weapons, and proceeded to stuff it with food and drink. She noticed half the room was completely bare and suspected that another tribute had already been there. Denise continued her room-by-room scan and found that one of the arches was barricaded by a wardrobe and a bunch of other furniture. Eugène quickly got to his feet as she rammed herself in. As soon as he saw Denise's face, Eugène hurled an axe at her, but Denise ducked, and the handle hit the wardrobe. Eugène quickly raced to unbarricade the other arch in the room, throwing furniture and backpacks in Denise's direction. A small cupboard hit her in the face and cut her forehead. Eugène ran out of the room carrying a sickle, and Denise repeated her speech about how there would be no hiders winning the games this year. Denise chased Eugène to the next floor, and he tried to throw her off by hiding inside another wardrobe. However, Denise had long become accustomed to spot-checking furniture in each room, so when she flung open the doors of the closet, Eugène was frozen in place as Denise bludgeoned him with her hatchet. Once she was sure he was dead, Denise prized his sickle out of his hand and went back to the ground floor to gather more supplies. Once she had done that, she continued her spot check of the rooms in reverse, unaware that there were no more tributes left in the bottom half of the tower. Back on the 10th floor, the members of both alliances were starting to get tired. Timo volunteered to do the first watch for the Baltics, but Lasma quickly stepped in and insisted she do it herself. She was clearly paranoid that Timo would defect to the other side and didn't want to give him the opportunity. Jana did the first watch shift for the Nordics, and once the rest of the tributes were settled down, he greeted Lasma to get her attention. Lasma looked up at him but did not respond. Jana told her that it wasn't too late to switch sides. He clarified that he wasn't talking about the whole Baltic alliance, but just her. He hypothesized that if the Estonian tribute defected, it would affect the game for years to come. But if the Latvian tribute defected, it would be seen as one person's selfish move, but there would be no long-term repercussions. After a while, Lasma stopped making eye contact. By midnight, Petros had received 3 sponsor packages from Portugal, Slovakia, and Belgium. Evidently, much of the audience was getting tired of the stalemate and wanted him to carry out his plan. The sponsor packages that year were delivered through the lift to a network of staff within the walls. Ode to Joy started to play over the loudspeakers, indicating that the death announcements were coming up. The speaker inside the 20th floor bedroom was so loud that it startled Sigmund and Nicolette awake. The names of the 12 fallen tributes were announced, starting with Bulgaria and concluding with Spain. Geoffrey was relieved to find out that Denise was still alive, while Petros pointed out that she was the only one alive who could possibly be on the lower floors. He also noted that the majority of the tributes remaining were part of the standoff, and they needed to whittle them down as soon as possible. Sigmund and Nicolette agreed to be part of the ambush after Petros agreed to give them some food in return, though when they came out, they were peeved to find that Petros hadn't told them about the sponsor packages. As they reached the 19th floor, Sigmund flicked on a torch, and Petros hissed at him to switch it off, reminding him of what happened to Sophia, the Cypriot tribute in the 4th Games. Sigmund pointed out that they had nothing to worry about as long as the Nordics and Baltics were still on the 10th floor, since Denise was allied with Geoffrey. Petros conceded but said to switch it off when they got to the 11th. Lasma and Yana were still on their watch shifts. Lasma had a torch and routinely shone it around the Nordic supply pile. When she shone it on Yana, he pulled face at her and used his sword to shine it back at her, so she stopped shining it on him altogether. The top floor tributes arrived on floor 10 and unanimously agreed that Geoffrey should make the first move. Geoffrey did not get a vote because slaves can't vote, according to Petros. Geoffrey stepped into the heart and stayed behind the pile. Lasma noticed him poke his head out right before he stabbed the nearest tribute, Frida, in the chest with a dagger. Frida let out a piercing scream which alerted the rest of her allies as well as Timo and Vitalia. By that point, Lasma had climbed down from their pile and hissed her allies to grab what they could and go downstairs. They were both too groggy to realise what was going on, but followed Lasma's orders anyway. Nicolette and Sigmund retreated upstairs, and Yana started yelling at his allies to find a fucking flashlight, but none of them had one within reach. Petros followed the sound of Frida's scream, and used his sword to finish her off, but he was suddenly grabbed by Yana. Petros initially managed to break free, but Yana grabbed him again and yelled for backup. Soon all 3 of the remaining Nordic tributes had Petros pinned against the wall. Petros started to yell the names of the other top floor tributes, but Nicolette and Sigmund were long gone, and Geoffrey lay flat against the wall, completely paralysed with fear. Mateos used Petros' own sword to stab him in the head, and the 3 of them stood back and let his body flop to the ground. Yana repeated the names that Petros had screamed and asked aloud where they had gone. Esther said she heard people running upstairs, and Yana concluded that they must have all retreated. He added that they had the hearts themselves now, since he also saw the Baltics evacuate. Geoffrey did his best not to breathe a sigh of relief as he heard the Nordics return to their pile. It took him 10 minutes to sidestep out of the heart, and another hour passed before he tripped and fell down the stairs to the 9th floor. The Baltics were huddled in a room on the same floor, and Geoffrey's moans and groans caught the attention of Timo, who was keeping watch. He decided to stay put but held his spear in an upright position. The next morning, the Baltics found Geoffrey passed out next to the stairs. They considered killing him, but when Lasma identified him as the one who stabbed Frida, Vitalia suggested keeping him around because he could help them find other tributes. The Baltics spent much of day 2 patrolling the lower floors for other tributes, but they weren't very thorough and didn't notice Denise passed out on the 5th floor. Meanwhile, the Nordic Alliance helped themselves to the supplies that the Baltics left behind, and Yana led them in going upstairs to find the tributes who tried to ambush them the night before. After they went up a couple of floors, Yana told his allies that he had an idea. He went over to a sink in one of the rooms and plugged both the holes with scraps of bread. Esther asked what he was doing. Yana turned both taps on a full blast and told him he was creating a flood. Mateos told Yana to stand aside, then he used his hands to pull the tops off. Sigmund and Nicolette chose not to return to the top floor, remembering what Petros said about being cornered, and they chose to set up camp on the 18th floor instead. The Nordics reached their floor shortly after midday, and they tried to sneak out, but ended up coming face to face with them. Sigmund quickly shot an arrow that hit Yana straight in the heart, killing him within seconds. Esther and Mateos ran after them, and Esther wrestled Sigmund to the ground and performed an Albion on him, bashing his head against the floor and killing him with his own weapon. Esther got back up and said they needed to catch Nicolette too, but Mateos stopped her, saying they would waste their energy and she would likely die after encountering other tributes. He told Esther that he hoped they would be the last 2 left, and she giggled before they locked lips. Denise woke up and was horrified to find that water was dripping through the stone tiles of the ceiling, but she nonetheless continued her journey upwards to find more hiders. The Baltic Alliance came back upstairs, checking each room at a faster pace than Denise. Denise heard them talking when they were both on the 8th floor, and she snuck over to them and threw her hatchet at Timo, which hit him in the neck. Without thinking, Lasma pushed Vitalia in front of her and ran off. Vitalia was not prepared to fight Denise on her own and ran away too, but Denise easily grabbed her long blonde locks and got her in a headlock. Vitalia screamed Lasma's name for help, but her neighbour to the north didn't look back. As Denise slit the Lithuanian tribute's throat, she glared at Geoffrey and started yelling at him for allying with the Baltics. Geoffrey tried to defend himself, but Denise told him to zip it and that catching Lasma was the top priority. The Brexiteers went upstairs to chase after her, not realising that Lasma had actually gone back downstairs. Denise remained thorough in her search of every room. Nicolette ended up being on the 12th floor at the same time as them, but neither party noticed the other, and they all passed through without consequence. Denise also scraped the soggy bread out of the sinks, which couldn't stop the flooding, but slowed it down a bit. Not much happened during the second night, as most of the tributes stayed in place, though Lasma had to switch floors at one point due to the flood continuing to spread. Lasma and Nicolette ended up having an encounter early the next morning. At first, they readied their weapons, but as Lasma charged towards her, Nicolette pointed out that Lasma had no allies left while the rest of the remaining tributes were paired up, so she would be at a disadvantage. Lasma ultimately agreed, and the two of them formed a temporary alliance. She was secretly relieved because Nicolette gave her some food and she had barely eaten in the last 24 hours. They chose to set up camp on the 13th floor, but they didn't realise that their encounter had been quite loud. Denise heard them and she and Geoffrey changed direction and went back downstairs. Lasma and Nicolette were quite close to the staircase on the 13th floor, and they heard Denise and Geoffrey's footsteps. They tried to sneak away, but they could hear the Brexiteers getting closer and closer. The two girls looked at each other in panic, and then Lasma beckoned Nicolette to lean over to her. Nicolette did so, expecting that Lasma would whisper something in her ear. Instead, the Latvian girl stabbed her in the chest and ran off. Nicolette let out a piercing scream which alerted Denise and Geoffrey, and they didn't hear Lasma going in another direction. Nicolette was gasping for her breath when the Brexiteers found her, and Denise finished her off with a sickle. She picked up the throwing knives that Nicolette had dropped and handed them to Geoffrey. Geoffrey clarified whether this would be his own weapon, and Denise shrugged and said it was. Geoffrey exclaimed, "Finally!" and proceeded to stab himself in the temple. Denise immediately screamed her head off and turned her head in all directions, yelling swear words. When she calmed down, she kicked Geoffrey's body and said, "Fine, that's one more opponent down." She continued her way back upstairs, once again not realising that Lasma had returned to the lower floors. Esther and Mateos had locked themselves in the room on the 20th floor, and it turned out that kissing was just the beginning for this blooming couple. So when Denise tried the door handle, they were too busy getting their clothes back on to prepare a defence plan. Denise rammed down the door with her body on the first attempt and flung a throwing knife which hit Mateos in the stomach. Mateos looked down in shock and tried to use his charm as a last resort, telling Denise that they could come up with an arrangement for all three of them. Esther was disgusted by this and told Denise to finish him off. Denise gleefully did so, but Esther pulled a Nancy on her, stabbing her while her back was turned. The loudspeaker announced that Esther and Lasma were the final two tributes remaining, and told them to report to the 10th floor. The 5 previous winners had all gathered in the Europa Games extra studio to react to the endgame. All 5 of them were rooting for Esther, finding her gameplay more interesting and disapproving of Lasma's underhanded actions. Lasma arrived there first and used her small frame to hide in a backpack. When Esther arrived, she popped out and shot an arrow at her, hitting the Swedish tribute in the leg. Esther did her best not to react and tried to throw Denise's hatchet at Lasma, but she completely missed. Lasma charged towards Esther carrying a dagger, and even called Esther's bluff as she tried to step out of the way, but Esther suddenly let herself fall to the ground and land on top of her opponent. Lasma struggled to get up at first due to Esther's height weighing her down. Esther tried to use her sword to stab Lasma, but she had to use so much force to keep Lasma pinned that it was difficult for her to change position. She stared Lasma down in frustration when suddenly the Latvian tribute spat in her face. Esther flinched in shock, and Lasma managed to get her arm free and stab Esther in the side of her waist. Esther gasped, and Lasma stabbed her in the chest 2 more times. She started to taunt Esther, telling her that she just had to believe she could win, and that was all. A tear fell from Esther's eye. She had dropped the sword on the floor, and Lasma stood in the way with her dagger. Lasma lunged at her once again, but Esther grabbed her and put her in a headlock. Even as she choked, Lasma continued to stab Esther all over her body. Back in the EGX studio, Kiastos was roaring at Esther to defeat Lasma already, but soon the Swedish tribute had so many stab wounds that she lost her grip and fell to the ground. Lasma took a deep inhale, then she grabbed Esther's sword and plunged her through the neck. As the winner takes it all started to play, Lasma smirked at Esther's corpse and said, "I didn't believe I could win. I knew it." Albin threw his head in his hands, devastated that his own tribute had not survived, but he couldn't help but smile when he saw how horrified Kiastos was. Lasma was greeted with a roar of applause when she stepped on stage for her winner's interview. She wore a carmine red dress with a white belt, representing the colours of the Latvian flag. Graham played a montage of Lasma's most memorable moments in the games. When confronted about pushing Vitalia and killing Nicolette, Lasma simply said that she knew there would only be one winner, and her fight-or-flight instincts kicked in. The interview concluded with a compilation of Europa Games extra clips, where Kiastos routinely moaned about Lasma's gameplay and insisted that she would never win, followed by his live reaction of Lasma claiming the victory. Lasma wiped a tear from her eye in laughter, and Graham asked her if she had anything to say to Kiastos. With a sly grin, Laswa winked to the camera and told casters that she was looking forward to working with him. Hope you enjoyed. The idea to play the winner takes it all after victory was taken from a comment that I saw on one of Blanco's videos, so I'd like to give credit for that. Next time, 3 new countries will join the mix. See if you can guess which ones in the comments below. Signing out.